Thank you very much. And I must praise people who have stayed for lots and lots of presentations about oil palm. I was put at the end maybe because I'm going to talk about what many people are interested in, which is prices of palm oil. So I'm going to explain what has really changed about the prices of vegetable oils, but particularly palm oil, since 2007. And the influence of stocks on prices has changed in the same period. And I'm going in particular to try to persuade you that palm oil is now to be considered part of the global fuel and biofuel and general petroleum complex. Energy prices are very important now for understanding palm oil prices. One thing which has become increasingly important for palm oil, unlike other oils, is the influence of export taxes. Indonesia has export taxes, so when you export palm oil, you pay a tax. There are lower export taxes today in Malaysia. They're also of importance. I'll discuss them briefly, and then what I want to show you is how prices have stimulated the expansion in plantings, especially in Indonesia, and I will end up by just summarizing some lessons for how you can prepare your own forecasts of palm oil prices. So there's quite a lot to cover. So I'm first going to show you what used to determine the price of vegetable oils. If you look back before 2007, you'll see that the price of petroleum, everything here is in dollars per ton, everything here is in Rotterdam or in Northwest Europe. The blue line is petroleum. The yellow brownish line is palm oil. The red line is soybean oil. The black line is sunflower oil, and the green line in this diagram is rapeseed oil. What I really want you to see is, first of all, palm oil was and still is the cheapest oil, which helped it capture new markets. But more important, up until 2007, this stops at the end of 2006, there was no link at all between the price of petroleum and the price of vegetable oil. I think you'll agree with me. And at that time, if you wanted to understand what changed the palm oil price over time, you looked at stocks. On this diagram, up until 2007, I show you the change year on year from one month to the same month 1 year before, January on January, February on February. Here is the change in price, shown in blue, against the change in stocks in Malaysia. And what you see is what you would expect as an economist, if you are economists. High stocks meant prices came down, low stocks, falling stocks meant prices went up. I hope you agree with me. The blue and the red lines were going in opposite directions. So up until 2007, it was not simple, but it was fairly clear that Malaysian stocks were the key determinant of world vegetable oil prices. And within the vegetable oil stocks, Malaysian palm oil stocks were the most important, because palm is the biggest single oil in production, and it's by far the biggest single oil in exports. You have already seen that today. And so you could say that up until 2007, Malaysian palm oil stocks, which are published every month by Malaysian Palm Oil Board, the Malaysian palm oil stocks were the most important single driver of world vegetable oil prices up until 2007. And one reason why we use Malaysian Palm Oil Board's data, which only is for Malaysia, is that we do not have good data for Indonesia. So what the world looks at is what MPOB publishes each month. Everything changed in 2007. This is the new world. Here I plot the same basic prices again. Blue is crude oil, is petroleum, dollars per ton. Brown, yellow is palm oil. Red is soybean oil. Green is rapeseed oil. And if you look at this, I hope you agree with me, and I've drawn a dotted line to show you. After the start of 2007, suddenly we see a clear link. We see petroleum at the bottom, and up above it are the other oils. And it looks as if they are trading within a price band. They are moving within a band where vegetable oils are tied with petroleum at the bottom. And in this next diagram, I have just taken those prices and just drawn one or two dotted lines to show you the price band. You can see there is a range with petroleum at the bottom and vegetable oil prices trading within a clear band. And now, when you try to look at the relationship which I showed you for the earlier years between changes in stocks and changes in price, there is no easy relationship. It used to be true that higher stocks meant lower prices, lower stocks, higher prices. That's no longer true. Sometimes it's true, but much of the time that is not true. We need something better. So, the forces that determine vegetable oil prices have changed. They now behave as if they were part of the petroleum complex. That's a massive change. And they are more or less trapped within a cage, the vegetable oil prices, that links them to petroleum. And the price that I use for petroleum is from Europe. It is the Brent North Sea crude oil. It's the one which has futures markets, and it's relevant in this region because prices in Singapore are virtually identical to the price of Brent crude. And it sets the floor to the price band. And what we saw is that palm oil is the oil within the price band whose price varies most within the band. Actually, I will show you the diagram. Can you see the brown line bounces around close to petroleum and then goes back up again? The green and the red for soybean and rapeseed are much more stable in terms of their differential above the petroleum price. And here I make this point at the bottom of this slide. The prices of the two other main vegetable oils, soybean and rapeseed oil, they first of all tend to trade very close to one another in Europe. And secondly, you will have seen that their differential, their gap above petroleum is much more stable than it is for palm oil. And this shows you those differentials. This line, this diagram shows you the gap between vegetable oil prices and petroleum prices since the start of 2007. The brown line shows you the premium for palm oil over crude oil. You can see it bounces around quite a lot. It fell just below zero very briefly at the end of last year, and it's bounced back up again, and it's currently just above $100. The purple line, which I have drawn as a horizontal line, shows you the average value of the palm oil premium over petroleum during this period. Recently, we see that palm oil's premium over petroleum has been lower than the average since 2007. You can see the red line, which is the premium for soybean oil, the blue line, the premium for rapeseed oil, which you see move quite close together. And I've drawn in green and in light yellow the average values of the soybean and rapeseed oil premium over petroleum since 2007. And this shows you what I said just before. The premium for palm oil bounces around much more than the premium for soybean oil and rapeseed oil. But the important point is, and that's very important, the petroleum price, which is, if you like, the zero in this diagram, is the floor to the vegetable oil market. We have seen in the last 12 months that even when stocks get very high, petroleum in some way acts as a floor to the vegetable oil price. So if we have high petroleum prices, we have high vegetable oil prices, and in particular it supports the palm oil price. I said that a simple diagram of stocks against prices no longer works. This is now the diagram that you should be using. And this shows you that premium, which I now show in blue, the premium from the, I'll just remind you, that is the brown line in this diagram. The blue here is the premium for palm oil over petroleum every month since 2007. Now I've added one other line. I have added in red the actual palm oil stocks in Malaysia. And I think it's absolutely clear when Malaysian stocks are high, the premium is low. When Malaysian stocks fall, the premium goes up. And you look at that, that is what has happened. Stocks matter, but they don't determine the total price. What they determine is the premium for palm oil over petroleum. And if petroleum prices had been lower, then the palm oil price would be lower. But this relationship, which is always about the premium, the gap between the palm oil price and petroleum, this moves up and down with the petroleum price. Stocks determine the premium. So, since 2007, we see that Brent crude oil has set a floor to European palm oil prices. And it is MPOB, Malaysian Palm Oil Board stocks, which determine the premium for palm oil over crude oil. And I say it here, palm oil stocks in Malaysia are very important in determining palm oil prices, but what they determine now is the premium, not the total level. And I say in the third paragraph, that premium has bounced around a lot. In the past 2 years, 1 year ago, 2 years ago, the premium was at a peak of about $300 a ton. There was a floor 6 months ago of 0 when palm oil and petroleum were at the same price. Currently, the premium is about $100. But we conclude high stocks mean a low premium, low stocks mean a high premium. Now, I've shown you what seems to be true, but it's very nice to understand why is that true, because those of you who follow palm oil closely will know that at the end of last year, we had the highest ever stocks of palm oil. They were very high in Malaysia, and everything we know about Indonesia shows they were very high also in Indonesia. What made it possible for the floor, where palm oil equals petroleum prices in Europe, what made that stick? Why didn't palm oil fall further? And the answer is that palm oil, when palm oil is at a certain price in Europe, it is cheaper in Southeast Asia, because Southeast Asia exports palm oil to Europe. So Southeast Asia is cheaper by the cost of freight. And what I show you here, this is now every single day since September last year. I show you, first of all, in red, the premium for palm oil in Rotterdam over petroleum. And then in blue, I show you the premium for local delivered palm oil inside Malaysia over petroleum. And what you see is that for a long period of more than 6 months, the blue line was below the thicker line at 0. For more than 6 months, petroleum inside Malaysia was actually more expensive than palm oil, or palm oil was at a discount. So you start to get the understanding of why it is that petroleum prices set a floor to the palm oil price. Because you can make palm oil into biodiesel, just like you can make petroleum into diesel. And biodiesel competes with diesel. You did not need a subsidy for a long period, even to replace diesel with biodiesel. Palm oil made palm biodiesel cheaper than diesel in Southeast Asia, inside Malaysia. Now, this is for Malaysia. The attractions of palm oil for a feedstock for making biodiesel was even stronger inside Indonesia. I mentioned at the beginning I was going to say a few words very quickly about export taxes. In Indonesia, when you export palm oil, you pay an export tax. The tax depends on the price. But what the export tax does is it means the price of palm oil inside Indonesia is cheaper than the price in the world market, because you have to pay the export tax, which lowers the price inside Indonesia. So what I show you here is the red line is the palm oil price in Rotterdam against petroleum. It is the premium for palm oil in Europe over petroleum. And that is the line that only for a few days went below zero. That was the floor to the price band. That's in Europe. The blue line is the premium for palm oil at the point of export from Indonesia, FOB, free on board, on a ship in Belawan port in Indonesia. And you can see, just like for Malaysia, the blue line for a long period was below zero. For a long period, even if you had taken palm oil from a ship about to sail from Indonesia, it was cheaper than petroleum, so you could make it competitively into biodiesel. But the real story is the green line. The green line shows you how big was the discount for palm oil against petroleum inside Indonesia. At its highest point, it was more than $200. You could take a ton of palm oil, make it into biodiesel, and compete with diesel, which you make from crude oil, and the palm oil was more than $200 cheaper. And even today, and the last line is for Friday last week, the very last dot on that green line, even today, palm oil inside Indonesia is cheaper than crude oil. So even without a subsidy, palm oil inside Indonesia is a cheaper fuel than petroleum. And that is the reason why the floor has been held to the palm oil price against petroleum. Because palm oil at recent times has been very competitive, not for food, but as a fuel. And if you have enough capacity to turn palm oil into biodiesel, and it seems we did, then the big stocks of palm oil were brought down, I think, much faster than most people had expected. Because nothing to do with demand for food, it was entirely because palm suddenly became a very competitive biodiesel. So freight costs and export taxes, that is what reinforced the floor to the price band. There is no doubt, and remember that last diagram, that without even any subsidies, palm became profitable as a fuel in Southeast Asia in the last few months. This was because freight costs meant that the floor to the EU price band, European price band, which was when palm oil was equal to petroleum, meant that palm oil was at a discount in Asia by the amount of the freight. And inside Indonesia, and today also inside Malaysia, you have export taxes as well on palm oil, which makes palm oil even more competitive as a biofuel. So the introduction of export taxes has reinforced the power of the floor to the price band. So, to finish, what is the outlook for palm oil prices today? The first thing that we know is when we're looking at palm oil output, there is seasonality. This shows you the fluctuations in the monthly production. It's produced every month of the year. Monthly production of palm oil in Malaysia, in blue, measured on the left, and monthly production of palm oil in Thailand, measured on the right. Myanmar in the south, your weather is much more like the weather in southern Thailand than Malaysia. And if you see, I hope you agree, the red line is much more volatile. It goes up and down much more than the volatility in Malaysia. In fact, the last year or two, rains have been quite good. So in Thailand, like in Malaysia, and I could show you a similar diagram for Indonesia, the volatility in Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia in the last 1 or 2 years has been similar. But when you have drier spells, then Thailand will have much more volatility. But what I want you to see is we are now in a time when production is fairly low, because we are in the first half of the year. Look at the blue, the latest reading, and it will recover. We know that palm oil production in the next 6 months will be increasing in Malaysia. That's always true. The other thing which is going on is there's what people often call a biological cycle. If we now don't look at the monthly production, but look at the growth in production compared with the same month of the previous year, month-on-month growth. So we compare production in June, when palm oil output is usually low, with production in June last year, when production is also usually low. If you compare year on year, you can see we've been through a period when, and this now is for Indonesia and Malaysia, Indonesia in blue, Malaysia in red. We've just been through a period when the year-on-year growth in output has been very high. The trees have been yielding quite strongly, but that growth is coming down. The trees, in a way, are getting tireder. So the year-on-year growth in output is now going to slow down, because there is, you can see it, a clear pattern to these things. We also see that the blue line is above the red line. The underlying growth in palm oil production is now much stronger in Indonesia than it is in Malaysia, which is tending to pull up world production of palm oil. So if we are just trying to look forward 6 months or so, we're having two factors that are working in opposite directions. The first is that just purely because always in the second half of the year production increases, the actual monthly output figures will be going up. That's always true. But the growth in output from a year before, the year-on-year growth, is going to slow down, as I show with those arrows. So production will increase, but not by as much year on year as it has been increasing earlier. And very important indeed, in the background, the high prices we've had for the last few years have been encouraging very large plantings of palm oil in Indonesia. This diagram shows you in blue the plantings in Indonesia, measured on the left-hand side, and in red it measures the price of palm oil inside Indonesia, allowing for export taxes. And what you see is what I think you would expect. High prices mean that people plant more oil palm. Low prices, they plant slightly less oil palm. And the thing is, when the trees are planted, it takes several years before you get production. And once they are yielding, you cannot switch it off. So when you look at this diagram, you know for sure that a big increase is coming in Indonesian production 1 year, 2 years, 3 years ahead. So what we're going to see is monthly palm oil output rising, as is usual in the second half of the year, but the year-on-year growth in output will be slowing. As I say, after mid-year, the monthly production of palm oil always rises, and it's going to do so again this year, because helped by rain. But the underlying percentage growth year-on-year is slowing. After, as we saw, it had been very strong in the early months of this year. And in the background, Indonesia, and the same is true of Thailand, are seeing their output boosted by the maturity of oil palms planted after the start of the high CPO prices in 2006, 2007, 2008. And those are going to underpin world palm oil output growth in the next few years, which means that palm oil stocks are going to be rising again from July. And that's going to be, in terms of our relationship between stocks and the premium, it's going to put downward pressure on the premium for palm oil prices over crude oil. So lessons for price forecasters. Lesson 1, the most important thing of all, in my opinion, is actually, if you can, to try to understand what determines the petroleum price. Because the petroleum price is what sets the floor to the palm oil market. So first of all, you need to know about petroleum. Then second, and in the background, you must monitor how fast planting has been happening in Indonesia. That country, Indonesia, is now the main driver of growth in world output, and it's going to remain that way for the foreseeable future, as recently planted areas, especially in Kalimantan and Borneo, start to mature and increase their yields. But in the short run, what you really must do to understand the premium for palm oil over petroleum is to keep a very close eye on seasonal shifts in palm oil output and palm oil stocks, because it is the stocks that determine how far above petroleum palm oil prices will be. And so if you're looking at the diagram which I showed you earlier, I just added some dotted lines. Stocks, the dotted green line, are going to start to go up again in Malaysia. And the premium for palm oil over petroleum, the blue line is now, the dotted line is in yellow, is going to start to fall. So it is inevitable that with higher stocks, we're going to see a fall in the premium for palm oil over crude oil. So I haven't said anything about the petroleum price. I will leave it to you to decide what you think it will do. If you think it won't change at all, then this tells you that the palm oil price will fall maybe by as much as $100 over the next 6 months. But at that point, we then come into the point where biofuels, biodiesel, the use of vegetable oil as a fuel becomes the savior of the market. It is what stops prices falling any further. If you think petroleum prices will go up, then you can start to be bullish about palm oil. If you think petroleum prices will fall, then you have another reason in the next 6 months to be bearish about price. So thank you very much.